All right, let me just finish getting set up here so I can see you all. All right. Last time we were looking at the history of New Testament criticism. Started at the Reformation, where Luther began the Reformation and looked at the Enlightenment and the impact of the Enlightenment on Western culture, how the Enlightenment said that human reason is the most important thing. It is the authority for our lives and belief, according to the Enlightenment. And then out of the Enlightenment came the first quest for the historical Jesus. We looked at Herman Samuel Reimarus, who is credited by most people with starting the first quest. We looked at people like Bauer and also his follower Strauss, who were very influential, however, in a negative way. And we looked at the Jesus that we saw in the first quest for the historical Jesus. A Jesus whose Judaism was very much downplayed, a Jesus who was simply a man and not God, a Jesus who was a giver of ethics rather than a savior who came to save us from our sins. And that was the kind of Jesus that came from the first quest for the historical Jesus. We looked at liberalism that arose during this time. And as you see on the PowerPoint here, the three factors that brought liberalism, it didn't bring it to a close by any means, but it broke that domination of liberalism in theology. So now we're going to go to the critique of the first quest of the historical Jesus. In 1906, Albert Schweitzer wrote a book entitled The Quest of the Historical Jesus. And this is the Albert Schweitzer that later became known as a medical missionary in Africa. In his book, he criticized the first quest for the historical Jesus. In fact, it was such a devastating critique that he brought the first quest to a close. Schweitzer offered an alternate Jesus, a different Jesus from the first quest. But in fact, it was no better than the Jesus of the first quest. The Jesus of the first quest was not an eschatological figure. He did not see himself as fulfilling the prophecies of the Old Testament. Schweitzer's Jesus was a radically eschatological figure. And for Schweitzer, there was no sense in which any prophecies were being fulfilled during the ministry of Jesus, but that Jesus thought they would be fulfilled either in his ministry or shortly after that. He emphasized the Jewishness of Jesus, and so his was much different. Schweitzer's interpretation, according to George Ladd, was based on three premises. Apocalyptic is an essential element in Jesus' message of the kingdom. Jesus' views came from Jewish apocalyptic. Now, we're going to go into apocalyptic a little bit later, but this was a way of interpreting it was a way of prophesying, of teaching truths about God that arose primarily between the testaments. We have some of it in the Old Testament, but it really flourished between the testaments. The book of Revelation in the New Testament is an example of apocalyptic. And Schweitzer says that, or Ladd says that Schweitzer's view of Jesus was based on it. Secondly, Jesus' message is exclusively eschatological. There was no way in which it could be considered a present reality in Jesus' ministry. He ignores statements like, if I, by the Spirit of God, cast out demons, the kingdom of God has come upon you. He ignores those kinds of passages and sees no fulfillment in Jesus' ministry. And then thirdly, Jesus thought that the kingdom would come at once in his lifetime. But did the kingdom, in the sense of the end of the age, come in his lifetime? No. So Jesus was deluded. He was wrong, according to Schweitzer. Now, you might be thinking, if Jesus was wrong, then what good is he for us? Why should we pay any attention to Jesus if he was wrong? Well, Schweitzer says, all is not lost. He said, Jesus means something to our world because a mighty spiritual force streams forth from him and flows throughout time also. He goes on and says, the truth is that he cannot be an authority for us at the level of understanding. He was wrong, right? That's what Schweitzer says, but only at the level of the will. His role can only be that of a powerful influence, which elicits hope and longings inherent in us and inspires us to heights and to a clarity we would not achieve if dependent on our own devices and without the influence of his personality. So what Schweitzer says is, we can't learn anything from Jesus in the sense of what God is like or anything like that, but he can be an inspiration to us. Look at what he did. He laid his life down. He thought that by laying down his life, he could bring in the kingdom of God. Well, it didn't happen, but he sure is inspirational. So that is basically what Schweitzer would say. So, take Jesus as a source of inspiration. A.M. Hunter, who was an evangelical scholar, described Schweitzer's Jesus this way. Jesus flung himself on the cross, hoping that his death would force God to bring it all to pass. He died in dereliction. That is his victory. Dereliction means being rejected. That he died in vain, according to this. Now, this is a shattering portrait of Jesus Christ, and it is a wrong portrait as well. It ignores the evidence that Jesus saw in his ministry the kingdom of God as already being present. It makes his ethics nonsense, and it presents Jesus as being delusional. Well, Schweitzer said that the Jesus of the liberals never existed, and Schweitzer's Jesus never existed either. The good thing that Schweitzer did was to point out the flaws of the liberal version of Jesus that we saw in the first quest. With the work of Schweitzer, the first quest for the historical Jesus came to an end. The thing that sets these scholars, the first quest scholars, apart from those that came after is that the first quest scholars believed that historical study of Jesus was important because it was important to the Christian faith. So we come to a dividing line now in the study of Jesus and of history. And we'll get into what came next in a minute. Let me just mention the History of Religion School. It's sometimes called comparative religion. And this arose in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And I list here some of the people who were involved in that: William Vrede, Johannes Weiss, Wilhelm Bousset, in Ernst Troeltsch. And basically they said that Jesus' religion and Paul's religion came from other religions contemporary with them or that went before them. So, they would ask, where did Jesus get his ideas? Well, then they would look around for places where Jesus got his ideas. They don't say that God spoke through him or that he was divine. And the same with Paul. Now, Jesus' research after Schweitzer. In the 20th century, we see a return to a truly biblical theology. There was a man by the name of Martin Kaler. Now, he was not an evangelical. I think he was probably really quite liberal. But he said that we can't get behind the Jesus of the Gospels to the real Jesus, because the Jesus of the Gospels is the only Jesus there is. There is not, like the first quest people tried to do, that there is not another Jesus hidden behind the Gospels. The only Jesus we have is the one in the Gospels. A man by the name of Martin Debelius started a way of studying the scriptures, the New Testament, called form criticism. It actually appeared in the Old Testament as well. But form criticism, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. The greatest promoter of form criticism was a man by the name of Rudolf Bultmann. Now, form criticism attempted to get back to the oral period after Jesus died and before the Gospels were written, to get back to that oral period and look at the way that their tradition developed. So let me see if I can just sort of make a timeline here. The cross there is Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And then over here, we have the writing of the Gospels. And then in the middle here, we would have an oral period. And form criticism concentrates on this oral period. So it looks at the New Testament and it asks, what was it when the Gospels were written that caused them to include this story or this saying of Jesus in the Gospel? So the emphasis here is on the early church. So with form criticism, the emphasis is not on Jesus. The emphasis is on the early church. Now, most evangelicals, myself included, reject the outcomes of form criticism. It could be that the method itself would be all right, but primarily those who used it were anti-supernaturalistic. They didn't really believe that God was at work in the life of Jesus. And, like they say with computers, garbage in, garbage out. If you put in bad data, the results are going to be bad. That's the way it was with form criticism. Their presuppositions were wrong. And because of that, they came out with wrong results. So most of those who used form criticism did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God, but a radical and perhaps deluded apocalyptic who thought the world was going to come to an end immediately. They rejected the supernaturalistic Jesus that they saw in the Gospels. So they had to explain how the Gospels present a supernatural Jesus, a Jesus who was divine as well as human. So they say we then need to get back to the Jesus before the Gospels were written. What was Jesus really like? And why is it that the Gospels present a supernatural Jesus? They thought that this transition happened during the oral period here. So if we could go back to the oral period here and explain how there are different forms that we see in the Gospels, and we can see the function that these forms play when the Gospels are written, then we may be able to get back to what the real Jesus was like. Okay, let's go on to the Bultmannian school. Rudolf Bultmann was the most influential New Testament theologian of the 20th century. He was a great exponent of form criticism, and he believed that the Jesus of history, that is the real man who walked on the earth, was so hidden between or hidden by the early church in the writings of the Gospels that we really can't get back to the man who lived here. He said the only thing that we can know about Jesus is that he lived and was crucified, because he says that the early church so transformed any information that we had about him that we can't really get back to who he really was. He said that the stories that we have here in the Gospels are myths. That is, they are stories that intend to give a spiritual teaching, but it's using fictional stories to communicate that. For example, the story of Jesus calming the storm on the sea. Bultmann would say, well, there really was no storm on the sea. Jesus didn't really say, peace, be still, and all the waves stopped and the wind stopped blowing and all of that. But he said it's given to us to teach the fact that in the storms of life, when our hearts are torn up by trials and worries, anxiety, that we can call on Jesus and he will still the storm in our hearts. So that is what that story is all about. It's not about the wind or the rain or that kind of thing. That never really happened, he would say. That's just a myth. But we can get the truth that we can experience calmness, strength in our lives when we think about Jesus. And he likened it to a grain of wheat. This is a stalk of wheat, grain. And you know, when you harvest wheat, on the outside, there is a husk. It's that tough part on the outside that you don't want. What you want is the kernel. The kernel is the good part on the inside. And he says that the myth is like the husk. We want to get rid of the myth, and we want to get to the kernel, which is the eternal truth. So he says we need to demythologize the Gospels. That is, get rid of the myth. Demyth means, get rid of. We need to get rid of the myths and get down to the eternal truths. His theology is called existential theology. Existential means how we feel inside, our gut feelings. And very much like Schweitzer, he would say Jesus is our example. He made the right choices. And the word choice is very important for Bultmann. We are offered choices. We need to make the right choices. And when we make the right choices, then this is authentic living. We are living authentically when we what's the word I'm looking for? When our actions align with our inner feelings. When we're not being hypocritical, but when we do what we really feel is important in our hearts. Now, he said Jesus did that, and it took him to the cross. We, like Jesus, ought to live authentic lives. We shouldn't be hypocritical. When we feel like we ought to do a certain thing, then we need to do it. And if we don't, then we are living inauthentic lives. See, the problem, though, with Bultmann is that he doesn't tell us how to live. There is no content in this. So if our hearts tell us to do something bad, well, I guess he would say we ought to do it. That way we're not being inauthentic. We're living out how we really feel. So if you're Adolf Hitler and you feel like you ought to kill 6 million Jews, well, then, I suppose you better do it because that's really how you feel. You see, there's no content in Bultmann's existential theology. We have a song, it was popular in America a long time ago, that said, climb every mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow till you find your dream. A nice song, but what should I dream? What should my dream be? Bultmann has no answer. So in response to what he said, we can't get back to the real Jesus. He said basically we can't even try. I mean, it's a hopeless cause because it's so buried by the church. Now, there were a couple theologians by the name of Hoskins and Davy, and they said something much like Kaler said earlier, that you can't get beyond the Jesus of the Gospels because the Jesus presented in the Gospels is the only Jesus there is. He has revealed himself in history. The Gospels give an accurate record of who he was. And so trying to get behind to some other Jesus is futile. It will not work. Form criticism arose starting in the 1920s, and it was very important through about the 1960s. Bultmann, like I said, became the most important New Testament theologian of the 20th century. And when I was in seminary, wasn't 100 years ago, but it was quite a few years ago, Dr. George Ladd, who was one of my professors, his goal in life was to disprove Bultmann. Now Bultmann is, he's a footnote in our New Testament theologies. But for many years, his theology held sway. Now, one thing about Bultmann and also Karl Barth, who was a very influential theologian, not New Testament theologian, but systematic theologian, for both of them, history was not important. See, for the writers of the First Quest, for them, history was important. They used the historical method. They wanted to find out what this Jesus was really like. For Barth and Bultmann, history is not important. So we come to the First Quest, but now we're at no quest. There's no quest for the historical Jesus at this point. Let me go on and just mention a few other people. I should just clarify here, not everybody went along with Bultmann. There were a number of good historians and theologians who saw that history was important, did historical studies, and even though Bultmann sort of held sway during those days, he didn't get everybody. Not everybody went along with him. One of those was a man by the name of Oscar Kuhlmann. And we talked about the concept of Heilsgeschichte before. He was a great proponent of this, history of salvation, that New Testament theology is the outworking of God's plan of redemption through history. And when I was in seminary, Kuhlmann was required reading. So the First Quest was dropped for about a half a century from Schweitzer until we come to the new or the Second Quest for the historical Jesus. And this was done by some of the followers of Bultmann. They were not as radical as Bultmann. Some of them followed William Vrede that we mentioned before. And they said that we can know a little bit about the Jesus of history. The beginning of the Second Quest for the historical Jesus is seen as going back to a lecture given in 1953 by Ernst Käsemann, a disciple of Bultmann, entitled The Problem of the Historical Jesus. And it called for a new quest for the historical Jesus. There he said that it was important to know something about Jesus other than just that he existed and was crucified. But it didn't go very far beyond Bultmann and continued much of the skepticism that Bultmann had. Like Bultmann before it, it carried on the search for a non-eschatological Jesus who had been stripped of his Jewishness. The Second Quest for the historical Jesus developed what were called criteria for authenticity. Criteria for authenticity. That is, how can we decide if a certain saying or a certain story about Christ was truly authentic? And so they came up with a number, 5 or 6 criteria that that you would look at to qualify something as being authentic. The only one I want to mention is called the criterion of dissimilarity or double dissimilarity. Dissimilarity or double dissimilarity. Dissimilarity means being different from something. Double dissimilarity means being different from 2 things. It says that in order to be an authentic saying of Jesus, it has to be something different from Judaism of the 1st century, and it has to be something different from the teachings of the early church. Now, in my opinion, that is really absurd, because to say it has to be different from Judaism, you're taking Jesus out of his context, and you're saying he has to disagree with everything that Judaism said. To say it has to be different from the early church, well, the early church was based on the teaching of Jesus. So you would expect what the early church taught to be at least partly what Jesus taught. But double dissimilarity says it has to be different from both, or Jesus didn't really say it. Okay, I'll just throw that in there as a way of critique of the second quest for the historical Jesus. Now, from the second quest, we have this group called the Jesus Seminar. It is a group of mostly liberal scholars who, over a period of years, attempted to decide what Jesus really said. Then they voted on the authenticity of the different sayings of Jesus. The results they put into a version of the New Testament called the Scholars Version, and it appears in a book entitled The Five Gospels: The Search for the Authentic Words of Jesus. And the fifth gospel is the Gospel of Thomas. In their analysis, they say that basically that anything that hints of a supernatural Jesus must have been inauthentic. So right at the beginning, they outrule anything that implies that Jesus was divine and did something supernaturally. Underlying this is the presupposition that Jesus was not the Son of God in any supernatural sense. So here they walk in the footsteps of Reimarus and Bauer. They come to the text justifying their biases, not even-handedly looking at the facts. For example, on page 25 of the Five Gospels, they say, sayings and narratives that reflect knowledge of events that took place after Jesus' death are the creation of the evangelists or the oral tradition before them. In other words, they're saying that if Jesus described the destruction of Jerusalem, which happened 40 years after his life, that those have to have been written after the destruction of Jerusalem, because Jesus could not have prophesied accurately what was going to happen. Let me give you another quote from the Jesus Seminar. The Gospels are now assumed, and I put this in yellow here, are assumed to be narratives in which the memory of Jesus is embellished by mythic elements that express the church's faith in him, and by plausible fictions that enhance the telling of the gospel story for first century listeners who knew about divine men and miracle workers firsthand. Supposedly, historical elements in these narratives must therefore be demonstrated to be so. So they are saying, we are going to study the New Testament with these assumptions. There is no supernatural. If there is supernatural, then it's a myth, it's a fiction. And anybody who doesn't believe that must prove that we're wrong. Well, I would say it should go the other way. That for 2,000 years, the church has believed that these are true. And if you would have to disprove them if you don't believe that they're true. So in using their methodology, they voted on the accuracy of the Gospels, and they decided what sayings of Jesus were authentic. They got together and they each had 4 marbles, a black one, a gray one, a pink one, and a red one. You all know what I mean by marbles, little round pieces of glass. And so I guess they would pass the hat around, and they would put in a marble for whether or not they believed that it was authentic. Red means that you believe that Jesus really said that. Pink, it means that you believe Jesus may have said something like that. Gray, it means Jesus probably didn't say anything like that. And black means Jesus definitely didn't say anything like that. And so they collected the marbles, and then they color coded their New Testament with these colors. Like, you know, we have red letter editions of the Bible. Well, they did sort of the same thing. So in their Bible, if it's in red, Jesus said it. If it's in pink, well, they may have said something like that. If it's in gray, it probably didn't say that. And if it's in black, he definitely didn't say that. So what has been the result of their, quote, scholarship? As you look through their New Testament, you see that there is hardly anything in red. For example, in the Sermon on the Mount, the only red words there are Jesus saying, turn the other cheek, love your enemies, and our Father in the Lord's Prayer. That is the only thing that is read that they say Jesus definitely said in the Sermon on the Mount. And in fact, 82% of the sayings of Jesus are seen as inauthentic, and much of the other 18% is doubtful. In the Gospel of John, only 3 lines are not in black, and they are gray. The Jesus Seminar then turned its attention to the actions of Jesus. And what did they come up with on that? There are 176 events given in the Gospels in the life of Christ. Of those events, only 10 were considered certainly to have happened, and only 19 or 11% were probable. They decided that Jesus was not born of a virgin and that he did not rise from the dead. Now, the Jesus Seminar did not just want to be influential on scholars. They wanted to influence the culture at large. Of course, this is in the United States. They had good PR people, and the news magazines in America during Christmas season and Easter, they often come out with a religious cover story. And who do they quote when they write these cover stories? Well, for many years, it was the people of the Jesus Seminar. And you would get the idea that everybody believes what they believe. And of course, that is anything but the truth. There are many, many good scholars who believe in the authenticity of the happenings in the Gospels, in the authority of the scriptures, and but you wouldn't get that impression. In fact, we just finished the Christmas season here, and I bought a couple of those magazines, and I thought I would go through and just see who they quote. I could only see one quotation of all the quotations in those magazines from a known evangelical scholar. Everybody else was either liberals or people I had never heard of. The Jesus Seminar has not been active very much in recent years. Let me just mention one quote from N.T. Wright, which I'm not going to read because we would have to really unpack it. He uses a lot of long sentences and big words here, but you can go over this later. I think it's a pretty accurate description of the second quest for the historical Jesus. People in this quest are people like Ernst Käsemann, Hans Conzelmann, Günter Borkum, Edward Schillebeeckx, James M. Robinson, Joachim Jeremias, and the Jesus Seminar. All right, it's time for a break. So let us take a break. We'll open it up for some questions, and then we will go on from there. Take 10 minutes, and we will see you at the end of 10 minutes. All right, a greater confidence in the historical reliability of the oral tradition. So we are not going to say that the oral tradition radically changed the belief about Jesus. In fact, you know, there are scholars today like Richard Bauckham, who wrote a book, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, where he posits that the gospel accounts are, at least to a certain extent, from eyewitnesses and not simply something passed down in the oral tradition. Number 4, a greater emphasis on the Jewishness of Jesus. And that's important. We cannot divorce Jesus from his context. Jesus was a first century Jew, as well as being the Son of God and the perfect human. And then 5thly, no uniformity of theological or philosophical presuppositions. That is, in the third quest, there are conservative scholars, there are liberal scholars. It goes the whole gamut here. N.T. Wright said that the third quest asked these questions. How does Jesus fit into Judaism? What were Jesus' aims? Why did Jesus die? This is an important question. Not from a theological standpoint. Of course, it's important theologically, but historically, why did Jesus die? If Jesus was the Jesus of the first quest, who went around, patted children on the head and said, love one another, why would anybody want to crucify him? There must have been other reasons. So it's an important question to deal with. How and why did the early church begin? Why are the Gospels what they are? And how does the Jesus we discover by doing history relate to the contemporary church and the world? So the term third quest refers to a much looser group of scholars. It's not mostly liberal, it's not mostly conservative, it runs the whole gamut, as we've said. Now, some scholars believe that the third quest is basically over, that it isn't contributing anything new now to Jesus research. So the question is, then what next? And another question, who knows? Will there be a fourth quest? Well, we don't really know. In the third quest for the historical Jesus, here are some of the people that are seen as being involved in that. John Dominic Crossan, who is a liberal. Burton Mack, who's probably the most liberal of all of those here. Marcus Borg, who is also a liberal. And I put a cross there by his name because he has died. So when you see that cross, it means that they are no longer living. E.P. Sanders, an important New Testament scholar who's also a liberal. I. Howard Marshall, who was one of the main conservative Christian scholars in New Testament studies. He did our lectureship at APTS a few years ago. Donald Hagner, who also did our lectureship a little bit after Marshall did, who is a conservative scholar, and N.T. Wright. Now, I will be mentioning N.T. Wright several times during this course because today N.T. Wright is the most influential New Testament scholar in the world. It was Bultmann in the 20th century. N.T. Wright is now showing himself to be the most influential New Testament scholar in in this millennium.
So your audio is going.
It's the audio is going. Okay. I thought that with getting a new motherboard, it might have solved the problem, but I guess it didn't. So let me put in my headphones. Could I have a nod if it's clear?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, good. I was just saying that N.T. Wright is currently the most influential New Testament scholar in the world. I think he writes a book every Tuesday. And I've tried to read most of them. One person said, he writes faster than I can read. Well, that may be true. It is just amazing how many books he's written. I'm sure it's 100 books. And today I discovered a book that I had never heard of that he wrote. And I thought I was up on most of what he had written. So you'll be hearing more of him, and you need to take him into consideration. If you're going to be doing New Testament studies, you're going to have to deal with N.T. Wright.
Is he conservative or liberal, sir?
He's conservative. Not as conservative as a lot of people would like him. There are a lot of conservative scholars who don't like him, especially the Calvinistic, the new Calvinists, people like John MacArthur.
The Gospel Coalition?
I don't know. But John MacArthur, R.C. Sproul, John Piper, those disagree with him, and I disagree with him on a lot of things. But he is a conservative. He wrote a 600 and some page book on the resurrection of Christ, which is just magnificent. And but he has written a 4-volume series so far on the well, he calls it Christian Origins and the Question of God. And the volumes in it are the New Testament and the People of God, Jesus and the Victory of God, the Resurrection of the Son of God, and Paul and the Faithfulness of God. And actually, the volume on Paul is 2 volumes, a total of 1,660 pages. So I just don't see how a person can write that much. But he does, and it is it's not subpar. He writes both scholarly and popular works, and so there are a lot of places I disagree with Wright, but I would sure rather have Wright as being the most influential than Bultmann. Okay, any other questions here?
All right. What we've looked at here in the history of New Testament criticism has to do with the life of Jesus. We've not dealt with Paul at all. We will when we get to Paul. So that would be the new perspective on Paul. So we will get to that later. Here are some major recent and current evangelical New Testament scholars. Let's just briefly run over these. George Ladd, who wrote the most influential New Testament theology. He was my prof at Fuller when I was in seminary. F.F. Bruce. F.F. Bruce is one of those scholars, you know that whatever he writes is going to be good. Now, Bruce died a number of years ago, so he's no longer living. Same with Ladd. Leon Morris from Australia. He is a good evangelical scholar, although he's not a Pentecostal and doesn't believe the way Pentecostals do. James D.G. Dunn, who just recently passed away. And he, I would say, is on the edges of evangelicalism. He's not central evangelical, bordering on liberal at times. I. Howard Marshall, great scholar. N.T. Wright, Bruce Metzger, a great scholar from Princeton Seminary. I took a course from him when I was at Fuller, when he came from Princeton and did a block course. Richard B. Hayes, Donald Guthrie, who has passed. He's from a generation back, but a great scholar. Darrell Bock, who is at Dallas Theological Seminary. D.A. Carson, the co-author of your textbook. Luke Timothy Johnson, who is actually a Roman Catholic, but he is a good conservative scholar. Ben Witherington, who just did our lectureship a few years ago. Ralph P. Martin, who also was one of my profs at Fuller. Gordon D. Fee, who is an Assemblies of God minister, Pentecostal, and is now retired. He's suffering from Alzheimer's. Martin Hengel, who is a conservative German scholar. Now, conservative and German, some people would say are oxymorons. That is, they just don't go together. There aren't very many conservative Germans, but Hengel was. He died recently. And then the three Craigs, Craig Evans, Craig Keener, and Craig Blomberg. These are some recent current evangelical New Testament scholars. Some recent and current liberal scholars, Robert W. Funk, who began the Jesus Seminar, John Dominic Crossan, who is also a member of that and is quite a liberal scholar, Burton Mack, the most liberal of these probably, Bart Ehrman, who formerly was an evangelical. He was saved by a person in Campus Crusade as a teenager, went to Moody Bible Institute, then went to Wheaton College, and then Princeton Seminary. And there he lost his faith. He is now a confirmed agnostic. He writes books, I believe, with the intention of destroying people's faith in God as we understand him and in the Bible. And I might mention here that because of these liberal scholars who write books, you need to think critically. Everybody who writes a book on the New Testament, you can't just say, oh, he's really good because he's written a book on it. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to believe it. I remember asking Dr. George Ladd once, I said, is this a good book? I don't remember what one it was now. but he said it's an important book, but he wouldn't say it was a good book. And right now, you could probably go down to National Bookstore at the mall in Baguio and find books by Bart Ehrman. But if you think you're going to get food for your soul from those books, you're going to be greatly mistaken. So you need to carefully evaluate what you read. We have Marcus Borg, who recently died. In fact, there's a book co-written by Marcus Borg and N.T. Wright on the life of Christ. And they each write a chapter on each phase of the life of Christ. And it's very interesting to see a conservative viewpoint and then a liberal viewpoint on the same subject. E.P. Sanders and Elaine Pagels. Craig Keener, in his book, Spirit Hermeneutics, at the back of his book, he lists charismatic, Pentecostal, or Pentecostal scholars who are at work today in scholarship. And I have reproduced some of the names in the list. I couldn't reproduce all of them. But these people believe in the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Many of them are tongue speakers. And Wan Suk and Julie Ma here were from APTS. Wan Suk was our academic dean, and Julie was a professor here. And let me just briefly go through these. See if there's anything that needs any explanation. Russell Spittler here is a good friend of mine. He was my professor in college, and we always get together with him and his wife when we come back here. However, COVID has stopped that for the time being. And you'll see N.T. Wright in this list. N.T. Wright speaks in tongues. All right, we will just leave that with you. And that then will bring to an end our treatment of the history of New Testament criticism. So do you have questions here? Questions, comments?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Rachel.
Who was the one you said became an agnostic after studying at a seminary? Was it Bruton or the other one?
It was Bart Ehrman.
Bart Ehrman. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Ehrman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Yes, Bayan.
A question. Of course, the damage that the Jesus Seminar has done, because the History Channel tends to bring them up also when Holy Week comes around.
Mm-hmm.
But talking about the audiovisual social media, have you been able to watch any of the recent Hollywood productions of supposed Christian? I mean, I know Kevin Sorbo is trying to produce biblically themed movies, and they tend to do well for a short period, but the theological basis sometimes it's I know they try not to pander to the Christians, but they do tend to present some solid principles. Have you watched any of those recently?
I've not watched much of the very recent ones. There is a series called The Chosen that is very good. However, at this point, it's only available in the United States. But you can get the app, and you might want to just get the app and try it, but I've been told it only works in the States.
It works here, sir. We watch it here
Is that
through the
Gustavo?
app. Yes, we watch it here through the app. It's really good.
Okay,
same
well,
in the
good.
UK.
Second
Maybe-
season is about to come.
Okay, great, great. Uh,
Yeah.
I
And also, I believe the Calvary Chapel guys like Greg Laurie out of Riverside, California. He's presenting that would kind of catch the younger millennial generation X, Y, Z. You know,
Okay.
'cause- yeah, so that tends to help because a lot of people they won't read a book anymore.
right.
They
Yeah.
won't. But they'll watch it at the screen. Yeah.
Yeah. When I teach Life of Christ, um, when I do it on campus, we will watch a couple movies about Christ together and critique it. And
Mm.
then I will assign my students to watch movies on the life of Christ and write a critique.
Wow. Yeah.
So, but I haven't been able to see the very recent ones, at least not many of them. And I know that there are new ones being made.
That's good.
Yeah. Any other
Dr.
questions or comments here?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Gustavo here. What are your, what do you say about the Bible Project guys? They're kind of more new theologians, highly influenced by N.T. Wright, but and also for Scott McKnight a little bit.
Yeah,
But have you seen those?
I have not.
Okay.
The Bible Project. Yeah. Describe it for us.
Well, they do these animated films, more like a cartoons or that kind of things. Really, really well done, and they go quick on explaining every single Bible book. But also they have word studies and things like that. And their theology, I listen to their podcast. I find it really interesting and really deep, but I don't know how to define if they're conservative or liberal, but it's really interesting. And they have a web
Okay.
page and also a lot of videos on YouTube where they go to word studies and they explain kind of in a nutshell what every single book of the Bible is about. So
Yeah.
it's called the Bible Project.
Okay. It sounds good. There is a lot out there. And in fact, there's so much, if I went onto all of the Facebook pages that are theological discussions, I'd spend all my time there. And by the way, there is an N.T. Wright Facebook page, a Facebook discussion page. And of course, there's always new stuff on that. Many times during the day that they get hits, and it's very interesting as well. But yeah, there is a lot out there, and we need somebody to evaluate those kinds of things for a conservative and Pentecostal audience and give us an evaluation. Yeah. Other questions or comments?
Sorry, it's me again. I was surprised. I was surprised to see Dallas Willard in the charismatic Pentecostal list. I didn't know he was. He was kind of more as a philosopher.
Yes, and I have not tried to check out Keener's list,
Okay.
and I was surprised by some of those as well. But these people are not connected necessarily to the traditional Pentecostal groups.
Okay.
Some of them are Roman Catholics. N.T. Wright is Anglican. You'll notice in the groups that they do not include, Keener does not include people who are professors at Pentecostal denominational schools. So nobody from, for example, APTS would be listed there, or AGTS, Evangel University, or any other denominational affiliated school. They're not there.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, any other questions or comments?
Any English guys amongst that list?
I'm sure there are. I don't know where all they are from. Donald Gelpi is a Roman Catholic. Veli-Matti Karkkainen is Finnish from Finland, but in the States now, teaching at Fuller.
Isn't N.T. Wright from United Kingdom?
Yes, N.T. Wright is in the Anglican Church in, I think he's at Tyndale House now.
Oh, okay. The Anglican Church is going through something of a revival in the UK. Has been for some time.
I'm not sure if Peter Hawken down there at the bottom of the list is British. He is a Roman Catholic, and he did a lecture at APTS. Peter Kuzmich is European, but he's in the States now. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Hi, sir. Can I ask something?
Yes. Mhm.
I'm not sure if it's a good question, but are there some denomination or religion that emphasizes form criticism?
It is most influential in the mainline denominations. That would be Methodist, Presbyterian, the more liberal denominations. And today, form criticism would not be emphasized that much. So form criticism's heyday was like from probably the 1940s to the 1960s. And even though, it still has an impact, it's not as influential as it used to be. All right. Okay, let us go on. All right, we will look at the geography of the New Testament, geographical background. Let me get my notes up here. All right. Here is a map made by the first century geographer and historian Strabo that probably pretty accurately reflects the world as it was known in the first century. You've probably heard people say or call the Roman Empire the whole known world. Well, that isn't really accurate. In the first century, there was more known than the Roman Empire. If you look on this map, there's India there. And not on the map is China as well. China was known to the people in the Roman Empire in the first century. So there was more than the Roman Empire that was known during the life of Jesus and Paul. During the first half of the first century, there was a thriving trade with China. By AD 90, silk was imported from China, going through Parthia, there to the east of the Roman Empire. And in fact, silk is mentioned in Revelation 18:12. That silk that's mentioned there in the New Testament came from China. So perhaps Strabo was not comfortable enough putting China on here, but it was known in the first century. Now, here we're going to look primarily at the geography of the Gospels. We're going to look at other geographical areas when we cover those later when we study the Acts and the epistles. Except for Jesus' flight to Egypt in infancy, Jesus spent all of his life in Palestine, in this area at the east end of the Mediterranean Sea. This is the way that Palestine looks today. And I know that some people may be offended calling it Palestine and not Israel. How it should be termed, I don't really know what we should call it. But in the first century, it was Judea and Galilee and the various parts of that province. If you'll see Syria up on the right, during Jesus' time, the Romans controlled the area of Palestine out of its headquarters in Syria. And it had what we call client kings that worked for it. It was Herod during Jesus, at the time of Jesus' birth, and then his sons after that, and then later the proconsuls and prefects under the Romans. This is the way it looked during Jesus' time. So we see way up to the north, you can see Mount Hermon, come down a little bit to Upper Galilee there. You see the city of Dan way to the north there. Right near there, it's not on this map, but is Caesarea Philippi, and we'll talk about that later on. We have Upper Galilee and Lower Galilee, and we have the Sea of Galilee. Right to the right of the Sea of Galilee, and going underneath it, we have what's called the Decapolis, Greek-influenced cities. Coming on down, we have Samaria, and then below that, we have Judea, where Jerusalem is. Right near that, we have the Dead Sea. Now, going from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, we have the Jordan River. And then down below Judea, we have Idumea. If we look at Palestine, we see that it can be divided geographically into different divisions. To the far left, we have the coastal plain. This is on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. We have the Shephelah, which is like the foothills. And then we have the Central Mountain Range. These mountains aren't real tall, but Jerusalem is there. And then we have the Jordan Rift, this area between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. It's very low, below sea level. And then to the right of that, to the east, we have the Transjordan Plateau, and we have a mountain range over there, Mount Pisgah, from which Moses saw the land of Israel, is in that area. Here is another way of looking at it. To the left, the Mediterranean Sea, and then the coastal plain. We come up to the inner plain, which would be the Shephelah. We have the Judean mountains there, where Jerusalem is located. And then it goes way down, way south, way low. And you'll see the Dead Sea. This is below the level of the Mediterranean Sea. So if somehow the water from the Mediterranean Sea could go there, that whole area of the Dead Sea, Jericho and that area would all be underwater. And then to the east of that, to the right, we have the Transjordan Plateau and then the mountains. Okay, we're going to look at the areas of the New Testament according to Jesus' life. So it starts in Bethlehem, where Jesus is born. This is what Bethlehem looks like today. Of course, it didn't look like that when Jesus was there. But you will see it is a semi-arid country. There are not jungles or forests. It's really quite dry. It's very similar to California, where I am now. This is the Church of the Nativity, which was born at a traditional site or which was built at the traditional site where Jesus was born. And this is the inside of the Church of the Nativity. Here we have a map of Upper Galilee. Now you'll notice Bethlehem isn't there. Bethlehem is down near Jerusalem. But after Joseph and Mary and Jesus went to Egypt, they came back and they settled in Nazareth. Nazareth is right below the center, a little to the left. Now, Matthew, quoting Isaiah 9:1, calls Galilee, Galilee of the Gentiles, not because it had a lot of Gentiles, but because it was surrounded by Gentiles. This area to the east of the Sea of Galilee, the Decapolis, was all Gentile. The area of Phoenicia and Syria to the left was all Gentile there as well. This is the city of Nazareth as it looks today. When Jesus lived there, it was a very small town, not a very large population at all. On the other side of that hill, there is the ruins of the city of Sepphoris, which when Jesus lived there, it was a major and largely Gentile city. And it may be that when Joseph decided to settle in Nazareth, that it was because there was good employment opportunities because Sepphoris was being built at that time. Now, if we turn around and look the other direction, we see the Valley of Jezreel there. This is called the Mount of Precipice. And in the New Testament, when Jesus speaks at the synagogue in Nazareth, the people don't accept what he says, and they want to kill him. They want to push him off the cliff. And probably right here is where they were going to try to do Jesus in. This is the Sea of Galilee from the Mount of Beatitudes. Looking further south from the approximately the same place. Just to the west of the Sea of Galilee, there are the Arbel Cliffs. These are high cliffs. And when I took this picture, I was standing right near the edge of the cliff there, looking down to the Sea of Galilee and to a little village here called Magdala. Who can tell me anything about Magdala?
Mary Magdala.
Okay, Mary Magdalene came from Magdala. And this is where Mary came from. This was her hometown, right there on the Sea of Galilee. After I took this picture, this was in 2010. They have done excavations in Magdala and have excavated a significant synagogue in which Jesus almost certainly preached when he was there. This is a view of the Arbel Cliffs from the Sea of Galilee. So you see the cliffs on the left and the right. And we're going to probably talk about this later. But when Jesus was in the boat with the disciples and the storm came up, that was not an unusual thing, because the wind would whip down that canyon, come onto the sea, and cause violent storms. And so this is where that happened. And this is looking across the Sea of Galilee to the west, or to the east, rather. The area that you're seeing right there is probably the area where when Jesus cast the demons out of the man and they went into the pigs, that they ran down the steep incline into the sea. And then this is the southern shore of the Sea of Galilee. All right, we will stop here. Our time is up, and we will begin here next time. Are there any questions before we go?
Yeah, quick question on the
Yes.
Roman road system.
Yes.
Has anyone actually measured if that was the road system that Jesus may have taken? I mean, we know Paul probably did, but
Mhm.
the Roman road system, do you think Jesus used that, or he just used the little goat paths and little paths that only the people who lived there knew?
I would imagine that during his lifetime, he did use the Roman road system at
Faster.
times.
Faster.
Most of his travels are between Galilee and Judea.
That's right.
And normally he would go down right to the right here of where we see in this picture, cross the Jordan River, go down through Perea,
Mhm.
and then back over at Jericho and go to Jerusalem.
Go up to Jerusalem.
And I don't believe there was a road in the Roman road system there.
Yeah.
But he may have used it when he went to Tyre,
Yeah.
to Phoenicia, up in there. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
All right. God bless you. And we will see you next time.
Thank you, Dr. Gaylor.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, doctor.
Have a
Thank you, sir.
wonderful
Thank you.
weekend.
Get out there.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.